Hello everybody, this is David. Welcome back to my channel. This video is the next in our series, The Christian Ethic in the 21st Century, and we're currently looking at person-to-person ethics. How does the Christian ethics work itself out between the people we live with, our wife, our husband, our children, what about to our neighbours, that sort of thing. We've been looking at some of the difficulties that there are in marriage, and what I want to do in this video is look at quite a difficult subject actually. We're often accused as Christians, you only talk about sex all the time. Well, sex is a very important part of life, and it's very important to have the correct view of it. What has the Christian ethic to say about sexual intercourse before marriage and outside marriage? Let's have a look, shall we? Now, I think that the situation in regard to sexual intercourse before marriage is more difficult today than it has ever been in history. And because it is so difficult for the following reasons. Firstly, there is quite simple fact that the voices which once spoke for chastity no longer do so. It's very interesting that in 1959 or there, even from the 1950s in last century, there was the chairman of the chair of Christian ethics in America. He wrote, "The idea of virginity seems to me to be making its last stand against the sexual freedom which medicine has now made possible." And he also said a growing number of church people are challenging the fixed moral principles or rules about sex or anything else. So virginity was only an idea and is now a doomed idea, and people like that chairman regard it as inevitable. It's interesting, in 1959 the British Medical Association published a handbook called Getting Married, and that was written by Eustace Chesser and Winifred de Kock, and in it there was this following sentence: "Chastity is outmoded and should no longer be taught to young people." Now, it is true that in 1959 there were so many protests that the book had to be withdrawn. But the interesting thing is that it got to the length of being published at all. Now, one of the most significant things today is that if I can put it like this, the defences are being breached from the inside. So it's clear that for the modern young person, Christian chastity is much more difficult than it once was. What makes the situation much harder is that the church is not speaking with one voice on this. Even back in 1960, let's see what Professor Leo Koch of Illinois University said. Now, he was a biologist, but he was actually dismissed, to tell you the truth, for saying that premarital intercourse was ethically justifiable. And this is what he said: "With modern contraceptives and medical advice readily available at the nearest drugstore," he was American of course, "or at least a family physician, doctor, there is no valid reason why sexual intercourse should not be condoned among those sufficiently mature to engage in it without social consequences and without violating their own codes of morality and ethics." Now, this is the view of, unfortunately, too many leaders in the church. Just think about, for example, recently the Church of England in the United Kingdom brought out a guide to living in love, and it was essentially said that anything goes. So what do we mean when we ask? We need to be accurate when we define our terms. What do we mean by mature, for example? So it's obviously impossible to measure maturity by age because everyone's different. Now, there are many people who by their birth certificate ought to be mature, but who are in fact unstable, impulsive, insecure, neurotic. We would like a little bit more clarity on what these people mean by consent. For it's not the most obvious thing in the world that it is not difficult to buy consent. What sounds so straightforward and obvious is in fact full of difficulties. What are we then to say about this? Well, firstly, in the first place, sexual permissiveness in the way that we have it today is in fact fraught with very grave danger. So it's true to say that no one can study the teachings of Jesus and of the New Testament without seeing that the teaching stands for purity and chastity. Fornication, which is sexual intercourse between unmarried people, is condemned at least 18 times. Now, it's one of the basic demands on the Gentiles that they don't practice it, as we read in the book of Acts chapter 15, verse 20. Is not even to be thought of or spoken of by the Christian, as we read in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 18 and Ephesians chapter 6 verse 3. Adultery, which is sexual intercourse with a married person other than your own marriage partner, is condemned at least 15 times. Now, in Jesus' words, it is one of the sins which comes from the evil of the heart, as we read in Matthew chapter 15 verse 14. Now, very often the story of the woman taken in adultery, as we read in John chapter 8 verses 1 to 11, is cited as an example of the gentleness of Jesus. And from one point of view, it is. He was very gentle. But how does it end? It ends by Jesus saying, "Go and sin no more." Jesus didn't say, "It's quite all right, don't worry." No, there was no question of the woman getting the impression that the whole thing didn't matter very much, and that forgiveness was easy to come by, and that she could easily do it all again. The demand was, go and sin no more. So Jesus leaves us in no doubt that he believed that she had sinned. She was forgiven, but she was firmly told that it must never happen again. So there is no way of making Jesus a supporter of permissive behaviour. If we support sexual intercourse before marriage or outside marriage or even homosexuality, then I don't see how we can continue to call ourselves Christian. For a person cannot be a Christian and flatly contradict the teachings of Jesus Christ. Now, it's one thing, honestly, to say that we will abandon the demands of the Christian morality, as unfortunately we've done so in this country over the last 70 years. It's still quite another thing to abandon them and to deceive ourselves into thinking that we are still keeping them, which is what the Church of England has done recently. So it's for this reason that while it's right to stress the dangers of permissiveness, the argument from danger is not in itself a good argument, because it seems to imply that if the danger could be removed, if there was no risk of a child, no peril of infection, for example, then the objection would be removed too. So what that does is to imply that the objection to the attendant dangers of promiscuity and not to promiscuity itself. But if sexual intercourse before and outside marriage is against the teaching of Jesus, then it's not only dangerous, it is wrong in itself. And that's what I'm trying to say in this video. So the argument is the supporters of promiscuity or new morality, if we could put it like that, place great stress on the fact, as they put it, sexual intercourse has two functions, baby making and love making. They then argue that since the modern methods of contraception, especially the pill, which has next to completely eliminated the production of a child, they say then there's no reason why the sexual act should not be used as lovemaking between people who are in love but who are not married. How are we going to answer that then? Well, what we need to think about is this, that beyond all argument, the Christian ethic teaches that it's always wrong to use a person as a thing. It is always wrong to use a person simply as the means of gratification or as a way of getting pleasure. Therefore, any act of sexual intercourse which is nothing other than the satisfaction of sexual desire is essentially wrong. That's why a marriage which is based on no more than desire is bound to fail, for the partners in it are basically using each other as things and not as persons. Now, finally, we come to what is almost the final step in the argument. The sexual act is, in the literal sense of the word, unique. It is unique for two reasons. First, it has a unique potential because through it, a child, a new life, can be brought into the world. Secondly, it is unique because it does something physically to a woman which cannot be undone, and which means she will literally never ever be the same again. The breaking of the hymen is an irreversible fact. This means that there is no comparison whatsoever between an act of sexual intercourse and, say, a kiss. This is lovemaking of a different kind, lovemaking with a unique potential and lovemaking with a unique effect. So it can be said to be lovemaking at its peak, at its highest, and such lovemaking ought only to be engaged in when people are totally, completely, and utterly committed to each other. It can only rightly happen when people are so totally committed to each other that they have become one new person, as we read in Genesis chapter 2 verse 24 and Matthew chapter 19 verse 5. Now, the Old Testament uses the verb to know for the act of sexual intercourse. Adam knew Eve, as we read in Genesis chapter 4 verse 1. Now, it's an act of complete and total mutual knowledge which can only come with complete and total self-giving. Now, if it's less than that, it is not so much wrong as tragically less than what it ought to be. It is not the expression of a moment of passion, however intense. It is the expression of a permanent commitment, and only the willingness to enter into commitment gives the right to enter upon that unique act. So we could put it this way: whatever we say about the two functions of sexual intercourse, the love-making and the baby-making, it remains true that the biological reason for the sex instinct is the begetting of a child. That is why it was given to us in the first place. That is the very economy and arrangement of nature. Therefore, even when it is an act of love-making, it may properly only be engaged in by those who would gladly and willingly use it to beget a child, even although at that particular moment it's not their intention to do so. It is the expression of a commitment of which the child is the symbol and the proof. So It becomes clear then that the great fault of premarital sexual intercourse is quite simply that it demands privilege without responsibility. It demands rights without commitment. This is why sexual intercourse is wrong even between people who say that they are so much in love and that marriage is certain and that they are only anticipating what will in any event happen. Now, we know only too well of the uncertainty of life, that even such a love can somehow be interrupted, and even such an anticipated marriage may not take place. Life happens, life gets in the way, as we say. So the utter commitment is still not entered on, and therefore the unique act is wrong. So the ultimate commitment must be fully there before the ultimate privilege is given and taken, even if such a view involves self-discipline. It leads to or self-denial for a time. It leads to the deepest satisfaction in the end. There is something tragic in making that which is sacred commonplace and that which is unique ordinary. There are things, and these the greatest things, whose value only fully comes when we do not take them until the time to take them has fully come. I'm going to leave this video here. Lots to think about here. We're going to end this series in the next video by, I want to quote some things that one of our greatest Prime Ministers said. So thank you for joining me in this video. See you on the next one. Bye bye.